To seize assets from Roman Abramovich after his sale of Chelsea Football Club, talk to both sides in the doctors' strike, ask why the Freemasons are suing the Met Police, and get the lowdown on the latest scandalous claims from the court of King Donald in Washington. Alcoholic personalities, ketamine and conspiracy. Quite a day. Join me after the news.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, it's 6 o'clock. The campaign against anti-Semitism says a crackdown on controversial chants at pro-Palestinian protests comes too late.
This seems to be very much a symbolic token gesture, which, whilst welcome, is something they should have been doing 2 years ago, and things have moved on a lot now. We need much more severe action from our police forces than just this one particular measure now.
Gideon Falter is calling for demonstrations to be banned altogether. Two of Britain's biggest police forces say the context has changed following Sunday's anti-Semitic terror attack in Sydney. The Palestine Solidarity Campaign says the move infringes on their right to protest. A teenager has appeared in court charged with the murder of a 9-year-old girl. Aria Thorpe was killed in Weston-super-Mare on Monday. A council in London has been accused of wasting millions by employing a building firm that went bust. It's understood Westminster City Council awarded a series of contracts despite warnings about the company's poor performance. The authority says it followed robust process, but that lessons have been learned. And Warner Brothers has advised investors to reject Paramount's takeover bid, insisting instead a merger with Netflix is better for customers. Paramount lodged a hostile offer after a £54 billion deal with the streamer was announced. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 89 points at 97.74. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.13. LBC weather, rain moving into the southeast tonight. Some scattered showers in the northwest, a low of -1. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. When I was a small boy and getting a bit above myself, it did happen, my mother would fix me with a stern look and she'd say, "It isn't clever, it isn't funny, and nobody is laughing." Well, I feel much the same these days about Prime Minister's questions. Today was the last session of the year at Westminster, and if your taste is for panto with no costumes, a charisma-free cast, and jokes from the place where cut-price crackers go to die, you'd have loved it. To be fair, there was one half-decent joke from Keir Starmer, of all people, who suggested to the Reform MPs that the next time they were approached by mysterious men from the East bearing gifts, they might consider reporting the matter to the police. Other than that, what did we learn? Well, pointed analysis from the Tories about Labour breaking its promises on tax, and open suggestions from the opposition that Keir Starmer will not be Prime Minister by this time next year. And I think this is a good moment to try to throw forward to what politics might bring us next, including a challenge to the Prime Minister from inside his own party. I've spent time talking to people on all sides, pollsters and politicians, and here is roughly where I think we've got to. It's possible, even probable, that 2026 will bring us some better news on the economy and more money in our pockets. Inflation is down again today by more than expected. Number 10 thinks we'll soon notice more police on the streets, more breakfast clubs in the schools, money off energy bills, more for the poorest families, the freeze on rail fares, and more. But the bleak truth of the PM is that the pollsters think he has fallen so far there is no way back. There are alternatives. Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester beats Nigel Farage as a popular leader and easily outperforms Starmer. But is there a way back to the Commons for him? Wes Streeting's tough and he's eloquent. If Labour could change leaders with a snap of the fingers and without a contest, it probably would. But it can't, and a long, drawn-out leadership fight could be catastrophic. The next weeks and months are going to be a lengthy game of chicken. Something needs to change, but right now everyone is a bit stuck, which means in turn that we are all a bit stuck. As my mum would have put it, it isn't funny, it isn't clever, and nobody's laughing. Let's hear first tonight from one of the cabinet ministers who remains a fiercely loyal supporter of Keir Starmer, the man in charge of relations with Europe, Nick Thomas-Symonds. I was listing good news ahead, and one part of that is that we're rejoining the Erasmus scheme for young people, allowing students and others to study in Europe in the years ahead. But it's going to cost us. He came to the studio to tell me what the rejoining of the Erasmus programme meant.
I'm proud to be announcing today what are going to be opportunities for tens of thousands of young people. We hope over 100,000 people in 2027. So this will be, as we would all understand it, a year abroad in university terms, but it's about much more than our university sector. I was at a further education college only this morning talking to people about the opportunities around things like sports training and sports visits overseas, but there are also opportunities around things like youth work, but adult learners as well. So this is a really broad-based programme, and it is as much for the student studying, say, a humanities subject who might want to go overseas to a university, to someone who is, say, an engineering apprentice who might want to spend some time in another country abroad as well. So it's a very broad-based scheme that I want to open up to people of whatever their background.
So this was something that before Brexit we were part of, and it allowed huge numbers of people to expand their horizons, literally, while they were learning. But it has been very much seen as something for university students. So if I was, as it were, training to be an electrician, I was doing some skills training perhaps with a British company, I would be open to this now. I could use this to go and do my training in Germany or Italy.
This is exactly it, Andrew, because you're absolutely right. It did have that perception. Now, the Erasmus Plus programme itself has changed in certainly the last 8 or 9 years to have this expanding to other forms of participation overseas, including the kind of work that I'm talking about. But I am absolutely determined between now and when this starts in 2027 to make sure that this scheme has been properly understood so that people listening, watching us today, I don't want them to think this is only about our university sector, hugely important though our university sector is. It is about whatever skills you have to offer. We want you to have the opportunity to make the best of them.
There have been 2 complaints about this. One, that we are paying a lot of money for this. It will eventually be almost £1 billion a year. That's big money to spend.
So in terms of the money, I've done 2 things. First of all, I've negotiated a 30% discount on this. And remember, it's not just handing money over. This is money that then goes into a grant pot for which young people here, and indeed adult learners too, can apply to. But the second point is this. Around this debate around level of participation in the scheme versus the amount of contribution, 10 months after the scheme starts, there will be, it's properly put into the agreement with the EU, a review of the data so we can see precisely the number of people here in the United Kingdom who have participated, their benefit, and indeed the contribution, to make absolutely sure that we are getting value for money. And although value for money is obviously hugely important, Andrew, there are so many benefits for people expanding their horizons as well.
So this is very much part of, as it were, the optimism agenda for the years ahead. The government's been talking about, holding down energy bills, freezing rail fares, a bit more of this kind of thing. But it comes against the background of the Prime Minister himself, let's be frank, very, very unpopular in the country, more unpopular than any Prime Minister has ever been, according to the pollsters. And some of your colleagues are circling Downing Street and thinking, I could do that job better. What's your message to them?
That there aren't that many Labour governments, Andrew, I'm afraid, since 1945. And when we are in power, we have to make absolutely the most of every day to deliver for the British people. If you look at this week alone, we've delivered the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. We are saving jobs in Grainmouth. I'm making this announcement for opportunities for tens of thousands of young people today. So my message is focus on delivery. That's what the Prime Minister wants us to do, and that's what we're doing as his ministers.
You've known Keir Starmer for a long time. He's a friend of yours. Why do you think he's so personally unpopular?
Well, firstly, can I just say the Prime Minister is one of the most resilient people I've certainly ever met in my life. And I know you won't be distracted from that. To your direct question, look, what I've found when I've been out on the doorsteps, which I am virtually every Saturday morning, is a really understandable desire from the public to see change that they feel in their communities. And when we were elected last year, there was one word on the side of our campaign bus. I know I was on it several days, the word change. And I think people are urging us to deliver that change, and that's precisely the work that we're doing.
Do you think if you'd explained to people during the election campaign just how deep the problems were and how difficult change would be to deliver, you'd be in a better position today?
I do think that in the election campaign, and I remember I appeared on speaking, as with many of my colleagues, every week on the media, we certainly said that the inheritance was going to be difficult. We knew it was going to be difficult. We also set out the challenges that you weren't going to be able to pull a single lever and suddenly all the frustrations people feel were going to be dealt with. But as of today, whether it's me, whether it's other members of the cabinet, whether it's the government, we are focused on delivery. We understand the pressures people are facing in their everyday lives. And that's why in the budget, we've seen things like taking £150 from energy bills. We've seen the freezing of rail fares, what we've done in relation to fuel duty.
And Nick, those things are welcome. But at the same time, in the budget, you've frozen thresholds on income tax. So millions and millions of people are going to be paying higher taxes. So that doesn't feel very good in terms of cost of living.
Well, the freezing of the thresholds obviously began under the previous government, but you've also got to look at the broader package that there's been in the budget. The Chancellor, whether it was in last year's budget or this year's, has been open about where we've had to find money for the government's priorities, not least, by the way, in terms of the National Health Service, where in the first 18 months of this government, we've hugely overshot our target here in England of the number of appointments we are providing for. But we're also being straight with the public about the need to rebuild our public services, unlike the opposition that seem to want us to improve public services, but they won't tell you where the money comes from.
Meanwhile, the BMA are doing their level best to ruin that record for you.
Look, I've been clear, the Prime Minister's been clear, the Health Secretary has been clear that we don't think this strike should be happening. We think it's irresponsible, particularly at this particular time of year. You've got flu, the number of flu cases that there are, and we're in the depths of winter with our National Health Service. And my message to the BMA is get back around the table with Wes Streeting, who has been doing all he possibly could to avert this happening.
You mentioned Wes Streeting. You know, many of your colleagues across the road in the Commons are muttering about who's the next leader going to be. Is it going to be Angela Rayner, perhaps Andy Burnham, who comes south from Greater Manchester, or Wes Streeting, or Shabana Mahmood, and so it goes on. But this depends upon the determination of the Prime Minister not to give up his position and to defend himself. Now, I'm told that his mood at the moment is pretty steely and, frankly, very angry about all of this. What's your impression?
Look, the Prime Minister, as I've said, is highly resilient. The Prime Minister is deeply determined. And he's not
going anywhere.
I see the Prime Minister is not going anywhere. The Prime Minister is determined to deliver for the British people. I see him every single week doing exactly that. And I know that's what he will continue to do.
We're living in a very different electoral landscape at the moment, where there are effectively 5 different parties in England, more in Wales, more in Scotland, competing for the voters' attention. In those circumstances, where do you think the greatest threat for Labour lies? Is it people defecting to Reform, or is it people on the left defecting to the Greens and possibly one day to Jeremy Corbyn?
But you see, the analysis for me is not about trying to look at it in those terms about one side or the other side. It is about what is within our control, and it's about what we can do to deliver. And I always think politics is actually quite basic when you see all this analysis. And I say that as someone who used to lecture politics, Andrew, that if you are delivering for people growth and better living standards for them, if you're delivering better public services, if you're dealing with the issue that people are very concerned about illegal migration in the English Channel, if you can do those things which are the Prime Minister's priorities, That is what we need to do to deliver. Not worry about one side or the other, but focus on delivery and improving people's lives.
Difficult news for the Prime Minister is the victory of Andrea Egan over Christine McAnee in the Unison vote, because he has lost somebody who has been overall an ally to himself and to this Labour government in favour of somebody who is neither of those things. It's going to cause you huge problems on the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party, and it may strongly influence who becomes the next leader of the Labour Party as well. Your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, can I pay tribute to Christina for the work that she has done, working very closely with the government to deliver what we've seen in recent days is now the Employment Rights Act, which this week has become an act of Parliament, which is the biggest upgrade to workers' rights since a Labour government was last in power.
You're now facing a big union leader who's going to be saying, not enough, not enough, not enough.
Well, look, with regard to Andrea, I've not met Andrea yet, but what I would say, first of all, is well done. She's the choice of the union membership, and I will look forward to a dialogue with her, as I would with business, as I do on a regular basis, with other trade union leaders, and indeed with civil society. And I've no doubt that she will want to represent, I'm sure, the views and interests of her members, as the other trade union leaders I deal with in the working day too.
2025 has been a really tough year, not just for the government, but for everybody. What's your sense about 2026? Is it going to be easier?
Well, I'm an optimist, Andrew, so I always hope for easier times. But for me personally, it's obviously going to be a big year in terms of the UK-EU relationship. I'll be today, in addition to the accession to Erasmus+, we have agreed that by the time of the next UK-EU summit, which we've not set a date yet, but will be in 2026, we will have agreed the food and drink agreement. We will have agreed the linking of our emissions trading systems, which will mean part of a larger carbon market, so our businesses don't get hit with carbon taxes, and also the youth experience scheme. So these are really exciting times, and we can take away costs for businesses, take away red tape, but also deliver more opportunities for young people too.
I'm not going to waste anyone's time by talking about the customs union, because we'll say, no, we're not going to go there. Nick Thomas-Symonds, thank you very much indeed. Well, listening to that was LBC's political correspondent, Aggie Chambre. And Aggie, you have more information about the election of the new Unison General Secretary.
I do indeed, Andrew. So I've been speaking today to people on the National Executive Committee about how this will affect the committee. And there is an acknowledgement from those inside the committee, and I'll say the people I spoke to are sort of pro-Starmer-ites, if there is such a thing. And they acknowledge this is going to be really, really difficult. I've also spoken to people within government who say this could be really bad. Although Keir Starmer currently has a majority on the National Executive Committee, his support, as we have seen, is slowly seeping away. And Christina McAnee, who Nick Thomas-Symonds was just talking about, she was the General Secretary of Unison. She was one of the most recognisable Starmer loyalists. And she has
many times in that very chair.
Exactly, and she has just been voted out of that role. So what does that say about upcoming elections too? Then, of course, there is Labour conference, and Unison has a big block of votes. What could that mean for motions passed on the floor? And then, of course, there's the Andy Burnham problem.
There is you say the Andy Burnham problem. We should say that the winner, Andrea Egan, was kicked out of the Labour Party for retweeting or reposting messages from Socialist Appeal, which is a kind of communist group excluded from the Labour Party. And she is a supporter of Andy Burnham's.
And she is a supporter of Andy Burnham. It's actually interesting that you bring up the fact that she was expelled from, her party membership was terminated, because people I spoke to on the NEC actually said as well, they thought as a gesture of goodwill, they should allow her back in.
I think they're going to need bags of goodwill on this one, Aggie. Thank you very much indeed. Now then, coming up, how has this rejoining of the Erasmus scheme and our efforts for closer ties with the EU gone down with the Europeans? We'll get a view from the continent next, but the time now, 6:19.
Call Kemi. Put your questions to the leader of the Conservative Party tonight from 7, only on LBC.
Hey, Harry.
Night with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:21. Let's go back to the news today that the UK is rejoining the EU Student Exchange Erasmus programme. We heard from a cabinet minister just now. Let's get a view from Europe with Cecilia Malmström, the former European Commissioner for Trade. Cecilia, thank you very much indeed for joining me. This seems to be a kind of a hand of friendship being extended from the UK and from the European Union at the same time.
Yeah, this is good news for Christmas. I think this is very welcome, hopefully on both sides of the pond. And many young people, both in Britain and in Europe, will welcome this.
When this scheme was going before Brexit, then I think twice as many European students came to the UK as the other way around. Do you expect the same kind of imbalance this time?
Well, I don't know. You have very good universities in the UK, but we have in Europe as well. So hopefully it would be more balanced. But the essential thing is that this can get going now and that young people can benefit from the program. It's always good to meet each other and get to learn from each other.
I was going to ask you, what do you think it does to somebody who spends maybe 6 months or a year of their education in another country? Why is it a good thing?
Well, it is a good thing because you get new friends, you get new perspectives, you get to learn how it is in another country that you think you know, but you don't really until you live there. You get challenging your old views. You get hopefully a whole new cultural experience as well, and you get to understand the politics and the societies of the country you are, and that makes you more educated person in the end.
Cecilia, there's an awful lot of people in the UK who would like to be back in the EU itself. And where do you think the next sort of tentative hand-to-hand is going to go on? In other words, which bit of the EU would you expect the UK to try to get alongside or even join?
Well, obviously, this is a decision that has to be made by the UK, and I know there are some sensitivities, but the declaration today signaled that at the next meeting, sometime next spring, there will be decisions on the emission trading system. There will be a common strategy on phyto and sanitarian arrangement. There is a discussion, I don't know if it will land next spring, on the waiver of the visa of the musicians. And, there could be more things happening as well.
The phytosanitary thing we should explain is food and farming project.
Food and drinks.
We certainly want to send you more musicians, and we certainly want some of yours back here. Cecilia, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC. Now, Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has accused the BMA of seeking to inflict maximum damage on the National Health Service as resident or junior doctors begin their 5-day pre-Christmas strike. But the doctors aren't moving, and talks have started again today with the Conciliation Service ACAS. So let's hear from both sides. First, Rory Deighton, who's head of acute care at the NHS Confederation. Rory, thank you very much indeed for joining me tonight. I've been listening to accounts by patients in hospitals just now, which are pretty horrific. People sitting for sort of 12 or 17 hours waiting for treatment. Really unacceptable. How much damage do you think this is going to do to the public perception, not of the BMA or of one hospital or another, but of the NHS itself?
I think that issue around public perception is really important for this dispute. I think that the NHS recognises that we need to regain the public's confidence in core issues like GP access, around the waiting list, 6.5 million people, 7.4 million pathways, and around urgent and emergency care, where waiting times are often too long, as you've described. And in hospitals across the country today, there will be people being treated in corridors, and we should be really upfront and honest about that. So I think public confidence is a really important point at this time.
And we're right in the middle of a pretty nasty flu epidemic, not surprising at this time of year. How worried are you about the situation in hospitals? You're an acute medicine guy.
I think the NHS always deals well with strikes. This is the 14th, I think, that we've covered over the last period of time. The response from our members this today on this first day of action is that the strikes have been well planned for, that there are senior consultants in emergency departments, that the turnout is something in the range of 40 to 70%, and there's a really significant variation from trust to trust. And it's always outpatient care that gets hit at this time. It's emergency departments will continue to run as usual, and that will always be the priority. But we will see reduced outpatient work and elective work over the next few days. I think in different parts of the country, it's different. So flu at the moment in the southwest, southeast, and the east of England is running higher than other areas. So there's additional pressure there on emergency departments.
And finally, your advice to somebody who is feeling ill tonight, wondering about, in these circumstances, still go to hospital.
Absolutely. So use the NHS in exactly the way that you would have done before. So 111 is a fabulous resource. Your pharmacy is a fabulous resource. If it's an emergency, absolutely come to your emergency department, come to your A&E, and use the resources sensibly. The NHS is operating and still open for business.
Rory Deighton from the NHS Confederation, thank you very much for talking to LBC. Now let's turn to a doctor, author and broadcaster, Rachel Clark. Rachel, many people will know your face very well. Thanks again for joining me tonight. Now, you have written to the Prime Minister and to Wes Streeting in a pretty angry mood about this strike. Just explain to people listening why you feel that way.
Well, I wrote a letter to them both, an open letter this morning, having had some conversations with resident doctors in my hospital where I work. I'm not a resident doctor. I was a decade ago when Jeremy Hunt took on junior doctors, as we were then called. And I felt compelled to write the letter, not in anger, but more in desperation, because those conditions you've just described, Andrew, people waiting for 12, 24, 36 hours in A&E, they're not happening today because resident doctors are on strike. They were happening last week, last month, in the summer. It's not a winter problem. It's not a flu problem. It's an NHS problem. And that is the status quo into which resident doctors are striking.
So there are two matters here, really. One is about money, let's be frank, and resident doctors had a thumping big pay increase last year, and they're looking for another huge pay increase, and the government say the money is simply not there, we can't do it. But there's a second issue, which is about the structure of doctors' careers, and that's, I think, what you feel particularly strongly about.
Indeed. So I genuinely don't believe that most resident doctors on strike today are doing so because they want to get rich quick, which is pretty much what the government's implying. They're striking in large part because we've got an absolutely astonishing state of affairs in the NHS now, which is NHS doctors literally facing unemployment. They cannot get jobs. Resident doctor workforce planning has been so badly managed that doctors now are taking on shifts as Uber drivers, as couriers, because they cannot get NHS training posts. And that is insane.
It is insane. But Rachel, I thought that was one of the things that Wes Streeting was trying to address and had done some work on.
Wes Streeting is extremely good at coming out with plausible scenarios that sound convincing to journalists and the public. This is a bit of a spin war at the moment. He has offered, apparently very graciously, to slightly increase the number of training posts for resident doctors, but not remotely sufficiently to ensure every doctor gets a training post in the NHS. He says he wants to rebuild the NHS. He wants to address waiting lists, the waits in A&E that are so awful for my patients. And yet he is perfectly happy to continue with a system in which every doctor who wants to train and develop their skills in the NHS cannot get training posts. So he's offered a fig leaf that plays well to the press, but he's not fixing the systemic problems. And that's why resident doctors in large part are striking. They're desperate. It's an act of last resort.
I rather hope he's listening. Rachel Clark, thank you very much indeed for that. Up next, the Prime Minister has threatened legal action against a former owner of Chelsea Football Club if the money from the sale of the club does not go towards supporting Ukraine. But will Roman Abramovich cough up? Time now, 6:30, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
Campaigners have accused two major police forces of political repression after announcing a tougher approach to controversial chants. The move has been welcomed by some Jewish groups, but the Palestine Solidarity campaign says it infringes on the right to protest. Nick Reiner has appeared in court charged with murdering his father, Hollywood director Rob Reiner, and his mother, Michelle. He'll be arraigned in January after the couple were found dead at home in LA on Sunday. And the Duke of Marlborough, formerly known as Jamie Blandford, has been charged with intentional strangulation. The relative of Sir Winston Churchill and Diana, Princess of Wales, is accused of 3 offences between November 2022 and May 2024. LBC weather, rain moving into the southeast tonight, some scattered showers in the northwest, a low of -1.
This is LBC.
When you
Night with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:33. Another piece of real news from the Commons today is the Prime Minister giving the oligarch Roman Abramovich a final warning to release £2.5 billion from the sale of Chelsea Football Club, or have the money seized and converted for the use of a new humanitarian foundation for Ukraine.
Mr. Speaker, I can announce that we're issuing a licence to transfer £2.5 billion from the sale of Chelsea Football Club. That's been frozen, those funds, since 2022. My message to Abramovich is this: the clock is ticking. Honour the commitment that you made and pay up now. And if you don't, we're prepared to go to court so every penny reaches those whose lives have been torn apart by Putin's illegal war.
Now, this is a story with more questions, I think, than answers, but let's get a few of the latter now from Sir Bill Browder, the anti-corruption campaigner and head of the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. He gave me his reaction to the news.
Well, I don't know. The only thing I don't like about it is that it's not the 90 days. Roman Abramovich made a commitment to the British government more than 3 years ago to hand this money over to Ukraine. I don't know why it hasn't been handed over. I don't know why the government has waited 3 years to issue ultimatums. And it's not clear that what the government is talking about is seizing those assets. They're talking about going to court, which is a whole other thing. And I'm not even sure what the court will decide. I haven't seen the agreements, but I would describe this as way too late. The government should have done this a long time ago, and there's a lot of people in Ukraine that desperately need money and support from this terror that they're being subjected to by Russia.
It is a bizarre situation because there's an indication or suggestion from the government here that the argument with Abramovich is that he wants some of the money spent in Russia, not just in Ukraine, to all the victims of war. In other words, not specifically for Ukrainians who've been suffering so far so much the worst.
Well, that's ridiculous. Russia has launched a war of aggression. Ukrainian civilians are the victim. Ukraine is not attacking Russia, or certainly not attacking civilians or attacking Russian oil refineries. But that's completely and absolutely ridiculous. And he shouldn't be dictating any terms at all. He agreed to this. He agreed to this 3 years ago. My read on the whole thing is that he probably doesn't want to give the money up at all, and just throwing delay tactics in the works so that, hopefully, and from his perspective, when the sanctions are lifted, he can get the money back. I would suspect that would be his motivation here.
He is a wily and to a certain extent mysterious character. Do you see him still as effectively an ally of Putin's?
Well, I don't think he can be anything other than an ally of Putin's. If you're in opposition to Putin in Russia, you get arrested, all your money gets taken away, and you get thrown in jail. And so all oligarchs are beholden to Putin. They all pray at the Putin altar, and they do whatever they're told to do. These people are not independent actors. They're dependent actors, and they're dependent on Vladimir Putin.
So on this story, your message would be to the British government, too little, too late, pull your fingers out and get on with it.
Absolutely. The Ukrainians desperately need this money. The money has been sitting there frozen, £2.5 billion. It could do a lot of good for Ukraine. Why did we wait 3 years? Why are we waiting another 90 days? Get onto it.
Can I ask you about a parallel story emerging out of Kiev at the moment, which is very worrying, which is a suggestion from Zelensky, or the people around Zelensky, that the Americans have been putting pressure on the Europeans not to unfreeze the frozen Russian assets and hand them to Ukraine. That's been something that Putin's been really concerned about, and it's beginning to look as if Trump and Putin on this crucial matter are speaking with one voice.
And you can understand why Trump people are doing this, because if that money gets released and given to Ukraine, then the Americans no longer have any leverage to demand territorial concessions. So right now, the Americans have said, we're not supplying any more financial and military aid to Ukraine. Because of that, Ukraine is lacking resources to continue fighting off the Russians. Because of that, America can make all sorts of unreasonable demands. And if Ukraine gets that money, then all of a sudden Ukraine can make an agreement or not make an agreement on terms that are acceptable to them, because they will have the time to decide when to make an agreement with Putin. And so that's very much not in the interest of Donald Trump and the current U.S. administration, because they want to be able to continue to have the leverage to dictate the terms, which at the moment are unreasonable terms.
Whether or not this money is unfrozen is a bit of a race against time. The Belgian government in particular does not want to do this because it's concerned about the Russian reaction. Do you think the Belgians are being intimidated and bullied?
Well, I can't imagine that they aren't. And there was a really disturbing story that came out last week from a small European newspaper called the EU Observer, in which they documented how the head of Euroclear, which is the bank or the custodian organization where the Russian money is held, that this person had been threatened with death from the Russians. And I can't imagine that a similar threat hasn't been made to the Prime Minister of Belgium. And I can imagine that his whole approach is he's actually personally scared for his own life. And so I think that he needs some protection to make this decision. But he needs to make this decision, and he can't be standing in the way, because the downside of Belgium blocking this money is that Ukraine runs out of money, Ukraine defenses crumble, Russia takes over Ukraine, Russia gets all the weapons that we've given them, and then all of a sudden we're dealing with 20 million Ukrainian refugees, and we're now dealing with fighting Russia ourselves, where British young men and women will be killed by Russian soldiers. And so this is really an existential moment for Britain and for the rest of Europe, that this money gets released so that Ukraine can continue fighting on.
The stakes could not be higher. Do you know where all this money originated? I mean, we're talking about vast sums of Russian money. Where did it come from? Who had it originally?
Well, this is the Russian central bank. This is the Russian government. This is the money that they've accumulated from the sale of oil and the sale of minerals and diamonds and other such things. And they've accumulated a very large, what they called a war chest. And they kept some of the money in dollars, some of it in euros, some of it in Swiss francs. And they had it literally as their war chest. They were going to use this money to conduct their war. And then like a week after the war started, Western governments very intelligently froze that money. And since then, the Russian government has done $1 trillion of damage to Ukraine. And we in the West have $300 billion of that money and should be given to Ukraine for whatever purposes they need it for. And right now they need it for defense.
In 4 years of conflict, is this, in your view, one of the absolute pivotal moments we're going to see played out over the next couple of weeks?
I think it is. I think that this is the key. If Ukraine can get this money, they can survive for as long as they need to defeat Russia. If they don't, they will be defeated, and then we'll be fighting Russia.
Absolutely fascinating. A very serious warning there. Sir Bill Browder, thank you so much for talking to LBC.
Thank you.
What a conversation that was. Now, we mentioned the election of the new Unison leader earlier in the programme, and the woman now in charge of the UK's largest trade union is no fan of the Prime Minister. Let's get the reaction from the Labour MP for York Central, I should say, Rachel Maskell. Rachel, great to have you on the show again. Now, I don't think you know the new leader, Andrea Egan, but she has been a pretty staunch critic of Keir Starmer. How do you think the Prime Minister and the people in Number 10 should respond to this news?
Well, first of all, I'm really delighted for Andrea Egan in being elected. It's a mammoth job being a General Secretary, and clearly she'll have a full inbox with the industrial responsibilities, but also, of course, the political relationship is so important. And I think at this point, clearly she'll need to meet with Keir Starmer and to set out her stall, the priorities of the members she represents. And at this pressing time, we know that she's already said that the cuts to welfare was something that she couldn't support, but also wants to advance the employment rights of her members at the same time of ensuring their economic security. I think the great thing which Andrea Egan brings is that she's been a social worker on the ground, doing the job, really connected to society, and being able to bring that experience into the fore at a time when there are many pressing issues. And of course, with the membership she has, social care, I am sure, will be at the top of her agenda in being able to press those reforms forward, because looking after a workforce which is underpaid and undervalued is really important for the Prime Minister to get a grip of. So I think politically there is significance as well as industrially.
So in general, crude terms, do you think her election takes the entire Labour movement a little bit to the left?
I certainly think it shows the progressive policies which Labour members and trade union members, importantly, expect of a Labour government. So I do think it is a positive change that we've seen in Unison. I think it will bring a new dynamic into politics, one that I think Keir Starmer should seriously reflect on, and want to, of course, serve those members, those working people across the country.
She's also been a pretty outspoken supporter of Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. Now, if he comes back into the Commons, he will, of course, be a possible challenger for the job of Prime Minister. Getting him there requires a by-election, and that requires the support of the NEC. Do you think, therefore, that this election of Andrea Egan makes that likelier?
Certainly makes it more possible, and I think having somebody that would be supportive of that position is helpful, because we want, obviously, for the members of the constituency, which Andy may or may not try and challenge, to have the broadest number of candidates to be able to scrutinise and to select from. So I think, in democratic terms, it's really important for the Labour Party membership, but also we've got to think about the future of our party too. Obviously, we see that polling coming through, and we need to ensure ahead of May that we have got the confidence with the membership and, most importantly, the electorate, that Labour is worth voting for at the election, with the things that we've been able to achieve, but the things we'll go on to achieve in local government, of course, Wales being a crucial marker of that, and beyond. So I think, there are obviously a lot of discussions that have been happening around the leadership of our different political parties here in Westminster, and I think we need to ensure that leaders are held to account with the agenda which the public want, but also the ability ability to communicate that. And Labour's done a lot of really good things. We just think about the Employment Rights Bill we've just passed, but being able to communicate that to the rest of the country is a really significant job.
One of the big themes, I suspect, of the weeks and months ahead. Rachel Maskell, thanks very much for talking to LBC. Now, caesarean sections, or C-sections, have overtaken natural births in England for the first time. What has contributed to the change, and what does it tell us about the state and quality of maternity care? Let's put those questions to the Chief Executive of the Birth Trauma Association, Kim Thomas. Kim, thanks very much indeed for joining me. First of all, are you surprised by this news that C-sections are now more popular than natural births?
I'm not entirely surprised, no, because they've been going up for the past 3 years. So one of the things that happened was that up until 2022, NHS England set a target, a sort of ceiling on caesarean sections, asking hospitals not to have more than 20% of births by caesarean section. And in 2022, they dropped that target. And at that point, caesarean sections started to go up. Nonetheless, it is a very high number. I think 45% of births are now by caesarean section. So it is dramatically higher than it was a few years ago.
I can't therefore imagine that this rise is entirely down to absolutely essential medical emergencies. In other words, it must be people electing to have C-sections for other reasons as well. Is it partly because, the substantial wound that's involved is now dealt with in a way that means people recover much more quickly than they used to?
Yeah, I think that's partly it. So, I think of that 45%, if I've got that figure right, just under half are planned or elective caesareans, and the rest are emergency caesareans carried out during labour. And, of those planned caesareans, some of them will be for medical reasons, such as, breech presentation or placenta previa. And some of them, as you say, are women choosing C-sections. And I think, yes, women are more confident choosing C-sections than they used to be. It used to be massively discouraged, and it's not so much anymore. NICE allows, NICE advises that if a woman wants caesarean, she should be allowed to have one. So I think those are all contributing factors, and that actually is a relatively safe operation. As you said, recovery tends to be quite good.
And quite quick.
Quite. Well, it's all relative, isn't it? But relatively quick. I think there's another factor as well, which you've had an emergency caesarean. It's often safer to have a planned caesarean next time rather than a vaginal birth. So yeah, that's a.
Kim, thank you very much for that. It's an, I think, pretty extraordinary piece of news, but thanks for talking to us about it. Now then, coming up, the most powerful woman in the White House, perhaps in America, has given a jaw-dropping interview to Vanity Fair. I'll be speaking to one of her predecessors as Chief of Staff to the President. But the time now, 6:48.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
Kemi Badenoch has certainly had a good autumn, but how can she build on that momentum in 2026? How can she resurrect the Conservative Party's electoral fortunes? She's with me for the next hour taking your calls.
Ian Dale at 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
Serious.
Britain's Conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:50. News just in about Trumpland. The president has an alcoholic's personality. His deputy, J.D. Vance, is a conspiracy theorist. And his former tech bro, Elon Musk, is an acknowledged ketamine user. Well, knew all of that, you might say. But these are the reported views of Donald Trump's own chief of staff, Susie Wiles, according to an article in Vanity Fair. I'm joined now by one of Wiles's predecessors in the role of White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney. Mr. Mulvaney, thank you very much for joining me. First of all, just explain to people who the chief of staff is in terms of the importance of the job. It's a very intimate job, right beside the president.
Andrew, it's good to see you. It's been too long. It is one of the most central features of our executive branch of government. The chief of staff essentially sits on top of the cabinet, is sort of a chief operating officer to the executive branch of government, whereas the president is the chief executive officer. So it's fair to say that she's probably one of the most powerful people in the country right now, certainly the most powerful woman.
So whether or not Vanity Fair sort of twisted her or put her out of context or whatever, this is an intensely embarrassing moment for Susie Wiles.
It is and it isn't. Keep in mind, a lot of the things that she said that have been focused on, the president has an alcoholic personality. He admits that. The vice president is a conspiracy theorist. He says that he does believe in conspiracies that are true. So there's a lot of things that I think have been blown out of proportion. But there are other things that are extraordinarily troubling along the lines of her admission that the president has been targeting his political enemies in criminal prosecutions. That could have major implications for their own criminal cases against those folks.
And Susie Wiles herself, I mean, she was early with Trump this time round, very, very close to him, clearly very important to him. And it's been interesting, since these interviews came out, Trumpland, or the MAGA world, has not turned on her. In other words, she's been given a bit of a pass on this overall.
Yeah, and they won't turn on her. She's doing an extraordinary, all reports are, Andrew, she's doing a tremendous job. Everybody likes her in this particular role. And I can tell you firsthand, it's a very difficult role to fill. So, no, there's no concern about her losing the position. Everyone is rallying to her for a reason. The question is, why did she do it in the first place?
Exactly.
Why do the interview? I've been trying to run through it in my head. Extreme naivete is one explanation, but she is certainly not naive about the way Washington works. Arrogance would be another answer, but she is not that at all. The only thing I can come back to is that Donald Trump told her to do it because he thought maybe they could get decent press out of it from Vanity Fair, which I think is a fool's errand. But there's no way that this was done by accident. The president had to know about this at the very highest levels.
Or maybe Vanity Fair were just enormously charming and persuaded her, with honey, they brought her in. But 11 conversations she had with them. So this is not a sort of a very brief, bypassing interview that's been then distorted. They got deep into her, not into her soul, but into her views about the Trump administration.
Not just 11 on the record and tape recorded. In fact, yesterday she came out and said, well, I didn't say that about Elon Musk being a ketamine user, and they played the tape where she actually did say that. So, no, this was not an accident. Sometimes when we do these things, when you talk for a living, you're going to say some stupid things from time to time. I think we all know that.
Tell me about it.
For a living, exactly. But this was not an accident. They did this on purpose. But again, at the end of the day, I think there's very, very little damage of anything done to her leadership, and she'll be around as long as she wants to stay.
And in terms of the wider Trump voting base, do you think anyone is surprised by any of this, including the ketamine allegation?
No, the thing about Venezuela is interesting that Trump, is interested in the oil and so forth. They're interested, in regime change. That was new. Some of the things about Ukraine was new. And again, as I mentioned, the thing about the targeting of political enemies is going to have real ramifications in the real world, but it's not going to have ramifications, I don't think, in the leadership structure at the White House.
Mick, there have been various commentators recently saying we have reached and passed peak Trump, that there is there's an atmosphere of kind of decline in the air around the White House. Do you read anything into that, or do you think that's wishful thinking by his enemies?
I think it bears watching. The Epstein file thing is noteworthy, Andrew, in that it was really the first instance of large chunks of the Republican Party here being willing to cross the president. the vote in the United States House of Representatives was massive in favor of releasing the files over the president's original objections. He then changed his position and sort of gave his permission to approve, but that was going to happen anyway. It will be what will bear watching is not this article. What will bear watching is whether or not more and more Republicans are willing to break from the president on policy issues as we get closer to the midterms. That, I think, is the more interesting thing that's happening right now in Washington.
Absolutely nothing lasts forever. Mick Mulvaney, thank you very much indeed for talking to me. Come back soon. Come back and do it again soon. Thank you. Now, the Freemasons and the hierarchy of the police have long been intertwined. But now the Met says it wants its officers to declare membership of the Masons. This is part of a drive for transparency, but the United Grand Lodge of England is not impressed and is taking legal action. Let's talk to Sean Butler, the Communications and Membership Director of the United Grand Lodge. Sean, thanks very much for talking to LBC. Why are you offended by this from the Met? After all, they're only asking their officers to declare something.
Well, good evening, Andrew, and firstly, thank you for inviting us on to discuss this important topic. Look, our view on this has always been extremely clear. To us, this policy is unlawful. It's clearly discriminatory. And in terms of what's wrong with it, for us, it strikes at the heart of fundamental freedoms and fairness, and it undermines the very principles of equality and justice that, in our eyes, policing should uphold. I think in addition to that, you know, at a time where the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police was on your channel last week claiming that retailers and shopkeepers need to step up and fill the gap to tackle the issue of shoplifting, the Metropolitan Police deemed this as a worthy reason to spend a considerable amount of taxpayers' money funding this misguided and inopportune action against us. We think it's completely unnecessary, and that's why we've taken the action that we have today.
I'm a little bit of an old git. I've been around for a while. I was in the House of Commons back in the 1980s, and there were two lodges working there, and there were MPs and members of staff and journalists who were Masons, and the rest of us who weren't did worry that they did favours for each other, that were little private conversations going on that we weren't part of. And the same thing has been alleged, by, as you know, about the police and indeed about the legal profession. Don't you think a little bit of sunlight needs to be let in on the situation?
Well, Andrew, what we'd say to that is that we, particularly in the last 30 or 40 years, have taken a number of steps to address misconceptions about Freemasonry, of which we acknowledge there are many. In our view, you know, this is a great opportunity for us to communicate openly with the public about who we are, about what we are. And I have to say, we do find it frustrating when, you know, words like secret and secrecy is banded around. Look, 2025, anything could be Googled online. You know, you could go out and find out anything. What we're here to talk about is the fact that our members value those key principles of integrity, friendship, respect and service. They represent that in communities up and down the country every single day. Over £1 million a week donated to charity. This, unfortunately for us, is a huge distraction, and we can't help but see it as an attempt by the Metropolitan Police to distract people from their own internal issues that they're having at the moment. They're looking in the wrong direction, I'm afraid, and we will not stand for it. We will stand up for the integrity of our members. Okay. We have to.
All right, Sean, I would love to discuss the treatment of Masonry in Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, but we don't have time for that. Thank you very much for coming on and talking to me anyway. Now, if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on the free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. Put your news category in the orders you like them. You can pause, you can rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. Download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store right now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish. But now it's time for Ian Dale and the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Thanks, Andrew.
Why doesn't he put patients first and ban doctors' strikes?
It's the final Call Kemi of the year. Well, it's your chance to talk to the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch. She's completed her first year in office. What do you make of it? She may have had a good few months and her personal favourability ratings have shot up.